I have been interested in near-death experiences since I read Raymond Moody's book, Life After Life, shortly after it was published in 1975. I'm curious, who else is familiar with that book? Okay. I was astounded and captivated by the contents of the book, in which he recounted the details of accounts of about 150 people who told him of continuing consciously apart from their medically compromised bodies and having blissful experiences in another type of existence, which is wonderful and loving beyond words, where they are met by deceased loved ones, by beings of light, are sometimes shown a life review in which they fully feel the impact of their actions on those affected in both beneficial and harmful ways, but is not felt as a judgment, rather more a profound understanding, and either told they cannot stay, or sometimes given a choice to stay or to return. Having accompanied both my parents on their final journeys, and just a year ago, my beloved husband, Robert, I wanted to take a closer look at the NDE phenomenon and share it with you on this Day of the Dead. So at the risk of becoming known as the woo-woo you-you, here goes. An NDE is defined by the International Association for Near-Death Experiences, or IANS, as a distinct subjective experience that a minority of people report after a near-death episode. In a near-death episode, a person is either clinically dead, near death, or is not expected to survive if without medical intervention. These circumstances include serious illness or injury, such as a car accident, military combat, childbirth, drowning, or suicide attempt. I don't think children are always lethal. At least we try not to have that happen. And by Dr. Kenneth Ring, who also says, he's another famous researcher and author, as conscious lucid experiences at the time of an imminent life-threatening event while the person is unconscious. The most well-known of the NDE researchers, Raymond Moody, MD, PhD, received a doctoral degree in philosophy from the University of Virginia in 1969. After teaching philosophy for 3 years, he decided to go to medical school with the goal of becoming a psychiatrist and teaching the philosophy of medicine in medical school. His interests in NDEs, for which he coined the term in his book, began in 1965, when he met a professor of psychiatry while an undergraduate. He was very taken with the professor's warmth, kindliness, and humor. Moody was very surprised and most interested upon hearing the man relate that he had died not once, but twice, about 10 minutes apart, and had a truly fantastic and wonderful story to tell about what had happened to him while he was dead. Moody recorded the talk and, taking a wait-and-see approach, filed it away. A few years later, while teaching a philosophy class, a student stopped by afterwards and wanted to know if they could discuss immortality. The student then related the story of his grandmother who had died during an operation and had had an amazing experience. To Moody's astonishment, the student related almost the same series of events that he had heard the professor describe. He started to include readings on the subject of human survival of biological death in his philosophy courses. He didn't mention the 2 cases he had already heard. He set the stage by adopting an open attitude and speaking generally of survival after death. To his amazement, he found that in every class of 30 or so students, at least one would come up afterwards and relate a personal near-death experience. And the most astonishing thing was the remarkable similarity of the accounts despite the large variability of religious, social, and educational backgrounds of the experiencers. He gathered a sizable number of these, and as people became aware of his interest, they wanted to hear what he had found. And he began giving talks in small groups, and then to increasingly larger groups. Eventually, friends convinced him to write a book of his findings. Upon writing his groundbreaking book, he says that he made it clear to readers that this was not a work of science. Rather, it was a work of observation, plain and simple. He would leave the serious research to others. Those others arrived on the scene fairly quickly. In his most recent book, Proof of Life After Life, 7 Reasons to Believe There Is an Afterlife, Moody writes, cardiologist Michael Sabom, MD, accepted the challenge. Sabom, who attended an adult Sunday school presentation of the book by Sarah Krutzinger, a psychiatric social worker, didn't believe the experiences in the book were real. Excuse me. Sabom and Krutzinger agreed to conduct their own study and to systematically conduct observations in a rigorous and unbiased method, aka the scientific method. The two researchers used patients who were physically near death, meaning a patient who'd had an extreme physiologic catastrophe who could not be expected to live without medical intervention. While conducting the study, Sabom became staff physician at the Atlanta Veterans Administration Hospital, where he had access to many near-death survivors. This greatly expanded the study population. The results of this study confirmed the findings in Moody's book. Dr. Sabom was not only convinced that Moody had not made up the accounts, he was also most intrigued by the out-of-body experiences that so many reported, by claiming many visual details, by detailing many visual details accurately, even though they were unconscious and should not have been able to remember anything at all. Excuse me. Allergy time. In 1977, Moody, Sabom, and 2 other famous NDE researchers, hold on. Kenneth Ring, PhD, and Bruce Grayson, MD, along with John Odette, would create the International Association of Near-Death Experiences, or IANS. This is the premier NDE research association in the world, which is a gathering place for accounts and which provided and still provides much needed support for individuals who have had an amazing life-threatening experience that they are mostly unable to share with anyone and who often have kept it to themselves for years or even decades until finding a sympathetic audience in this group. In the succeeding decades, as the NDE phenomenon entered mainstream awareness, interest grew in professional and academic settings to continue to research these occurrences. Here are some of the most well-known besides Raymond Moody and Michael Sabom. Oh, I'm sorry. See if this goes away. Bruce Grayson, MD, went on to conduct research as head of the Division of Perceptual Studies of the Department of Psychiatry and Neurobehavioral Sciences at the University of Virginia. Upon retiring in 2014, he is now Professor Emeritus there. Kenneth Ring, a co-founder of IANS, also founded its peer-reviewed Journal of Near-Death Studies. He read Moody's book when he was a young psychology professor, and like Michael Sabom, thought the topic deserved a more rigorously scientific research approach. Quoting from Dr. Ring's website, he sought out 102 near-death survivors for his research. Ken's groundbreaking book, Life After Death, a scientific investigation of the near-death experience, published in 1980 and followed in 1984 by Heading Toward Omega, In Search of the Meaning of the Near-Death Experience, which is the one that I read. Both books deal with near-death experiences and how they change people's lives. His research also involves the groundbreaking work of investigating near-death experiences among blind persons who can accurately report, even though they're blind in their earthly life, all kinds of things that went on in the OR or wherever the resuscitation is, and that can be corroborated, even though they are not sighted in their bodies. Dr. Jeffrey Long, a practicing radiation oncologist, founded the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation, NDERF, in 1998 and is among the leading researchers of near-death experiences. Dr. Long has collected more than 4,000 accounts from around the world. These experiences are available for anyone to read at nderf.org. In his introduction to his book, Dr. Moody writes, "My hope for this book is that it will draw attention to a phenomenon which is at once very widespread and very well hidden, and at the same time help create a more receptive attitude toward it. I think he has succeeded. It's important to note that NDEs have been reported throughout history and in all cultures." Quoting David Sanfilippo, PhD, in an article entitled An Overview of the Near-Death Experience Phenomenon from December 2006, he writes, "There are cave paintings in France and Spain that depict possible afterlife scenes that are similar to reported scenes related to near-death experiences. Plato's Republic presents the story of a near-death experience of a Greek soldier named In this account, the soldier is killed in battle, and his body is placed on a funeral pyre. Just before he is to be cremated, he wakens and tells the story of leaving his body and traveling with others to a place where they were all to be judged." From Wikipedia. In 1892, a series of subjective observations of workers falling from scaffolds, war soldiers who suffered injuries, climbers who had fallen from heights, or other individuals who had come close to death, near drownings, accidents, was reported by the geologist Albert Heim. This was also the first time the phenomenon was described as a clinical syndrome. Historical figures such as Carl Jung, Thomas Edison, and Ernest Hemingway have also reported their own near-death experiences. And in our time, for the last almost 50 years, the phenomenon has earned a place in the zeitgeist, although it is still taboo or not considered seriously by many in the population. In the U.S., it's estimated that of people who undergo a physical crisis that threatens their life and then return to life, between 10 and 17% report an NDE. In the U.S., an estimated 9 million people have reported an NDE, according to a 2011 study in Annals of the New York Academy of Sciences. Here is a summary of the main research findings by Dr. Kenneth Ring. This is what all the research has in common, but Ring did the summary. Those cases who come closest to death or were clinically dead, just as Moody's cases reported, told of being outside of their bodies or moving through a void or dark tunnel toward a luminous light, of meeting with departed relatives and friends, of having a feeling of great comfort and bliss, and of being surrounded by compassionate love, a feeling so beautiful they longed to remain. And when they returned to the earthly realm, they were affected by this feeling for the remainder of their lives. No one type of person was especially likely to have this experience. It cut across race, gender, age, education, mental states, and social class. Religious orientation was not a factor affecting either the likelihood or the depth of an NDE. An atheist was as likely to have one as was a devoutly religious person. Regardless of their prior attitudes, whether skeptical or deeply religious, and regardless of the many variations of religious beliefs and degrees of skepticism, from tolerant disbelief to outspoken atheism, most of these people were convinced that they had been in the presence of some supreme and loving power and had had a glimpse of a life yet to come. Drugs, anesthesia, and medication did not seem to be a factor in inducing these impressions and exquisite feelings of an NDE. Indeed, drugs and anesthesia seem to be more likely to cause a person to forget memories of an NDE. He definitely concluded that NDEs are not hallucinations, because hallucinations are rambling, unconnected, often unintelligible, and vary widely, whereas NDEs tend to have a similar element of a clear, connected pattern. Based on the information of those who had reported such incidents, the moment of death was often one of unparalleled beauty, peace, and comfort, a feeling of true love and total acceptance. This was possible even for those involved in horrible accidents in which they suffered very serious injuries, making for a tremendous comfort potential in this information for people who are facing death. After going through an NDE, people reported a loss of fear of death as well as a greater appreciation of life. They also reported stronger feelings of self-acceptance and a greater concern and sense of caring for other people. They had less interest in material things for their own sake. Many tended to become more spiritual, though not necessarily more involved in organized religion. Almost all subjects who experienced an NDE found their lives transformed, and a change in their attitudes and values, and in their inclination to love and to help others. Dr. Ring was convinced that these were absolutely authentic experiences, and noted that since returning, many of them had occasion to think about what might have been. And their subsequent lives were powerful testimony to our common ability to live more deeply, more appreciatively, more lovingly, and more spiritually. An additional note: it is also true that after decades of being involved in the research, the investigators themselves were also deeply affected and changed by the experiences that they were studying. There is a lot of variability in the different reports. Not all NDEs have all the elements, and they do not occur in a uniform order, but they all have some. Two of the most renowned experiencers are Eben Alexander, MD, a neurosurgeon, and Anita Moorjani, a British businesswoman of Indian descent who grew up and lived in Hong Kong and now lives in the US. Both of these experiencers have truly remarkable and medically inexplicable accounts. Both recovered completely. The fact that Alexander is a neurosurgeon makes his case particularly compelling. He writes, "At 40 a.m. on November 10th, 2008, I suddenly became very ill with acute bacterial meningoencephalitis. Within 4 hours, I was in deep coma. I spent the next 7 days comatose on a ventilator. Bacterial meningitis with such a rapid decline in neurologic function conferred a 90% mortality rate, as assessed at the time of my initial ER evaluation. But my prospects for survival rapidly worsened. My physicians at Lynchburg General Hospital in Virginia were shocked to find that I had acquired spontaneous E. coli meningitis, which has less than a 1 in 10 million annual incidence, so this is very rare. They were aided by experts at the University of Virginia, Duke, Massachusetts General Hospital, and beyond in their efforts to find a cause and force a turnaround in what at first seemed to be an irreversible death spiral as I failed to respond to triple antibiotics. My neurological examinations were consistent with diffuse cortical damage, brainstem damage. My CT scans revealed global neocortical involvement, and on the third day, my cerebral spinal fluid values were off the charts. I was extremely ill, with diminishing chances for survival and virtually no chance for recovery. My physicians never found a cause for my mysterious malady. Fortunately, my E. coli finally started to respond. On the 7th day of my coma, to everyone's surprise, I opened my eyes and started to come back. I was rapidly extubated by the shocked doctor in the intensive care unit. A family friend who was there could not get over my amazed expression, which she said looked more like the astonished gaze of an infant and not like one would expect from an adult returning from an unconscious state. Although Alexander developed profound amnesia of his life, his skills, knowledge, and even speech, and took a few weeks to recover them, he did recall what had happened to him during his week-long coma. He continues, "Those memories began in a primitive, coarse, unresponsive realm," he calls it the earthworm's eye view, "from which I was rescued by a slowly spinning clear white light associated with a musical melody that served as a portal up into rich and ultra-real realms. The Gateway Valley was filled with many earth-like and spiritual features. Vibrant and dynamic plant life with flowers and buds blossoming richly and no signs of death or decay. Waterfalls into sparkling crystal pools, thousands of beings dancing below in great joy and festivity, all fueled by swooping golden orbs in the sky above. Angelic choirs emanating chants and anthems that thundered through my awareness, and a lovely girl on a butterfly wing who proved months later to be central to my understanding of the reality of the experience. And I'll just say here quickly, the woman he recognized months later in a photograph was a sister that he was not aware of that he had. And that's how he found out. The chants and hymns thundering down from those angelic choirs provided yet another portal to higher realms, eventually ushering my awareness into the core, which he capitalizes, an unending inky blackness filled to overflowing with the infinite healing power of the all-living deity at the source, whom many might label as God or Allah, Vishnu, Jehovah, Yahweh. The names get in the way, and the conflicting details of Orthodox religions obscure the reality of such an infinitely loving and creative source. My coma taught me many things. First and foremost, near-death experiences and related mystical states of awareness reveal crucial truths about the nature of existence. Simply dismissing them as hallucinations is convenient for many in the conventional scientific community, but only continues to lead them away from the deeper truths these experiences are revealing to us. The conventional reductive materialist model, embraced by many in the scientific community, including its assumption that the physical brain creates consciousness and that our human existence is birth to death and nothing more, is fundamentally flawed. At its core, that physicalist model intentionally ignores what I believe is the fundament of all existence, consciousness itself. NDEs such as mine then represent the tip of the spear in a rapidly progressive enlightenment of the scientific community around the mind-brain relationship and our understanding of the very nature of reality. It is important to point out that before his NDE, Alexander was one of those agnostic, hardcore, reductive materialists. In contrast, Anita Moorjani had more conventional ideas of spirituality. She was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma in 2002. After 4 years of alternative treatment, she became extremely ill and went into a coma which lasted 30 hours. Her family was told she had mere hours to live. During her coma, excuse me, she had her NDE. Here is her story. As my husband rushed me to the hospital, the world around me started to appear surreal and dreamlike, and I could feel myself slip further and further from consciousness. The moment I arrived and the oncologist saw me, her face filled with shock. "Your wife's heart may still be beating," she told her husband, Danny, "but she's not really there. It's too late to save her. Her organs have already shut down. Her tumors have grown to the size of lemons throughout her lymphatic system. Her brain is filled with fluids, as are her lungs. And as you can see, her skin has developed lesions that are weeping with toxins. She won't make it through the night." I watched as Danny's face filled with anguish, and I wanted to cry out to him, "It's okay, darling, I'm okay. Please don't worry. Don't listen to the doctor. I actually feel great." But I couldn't, because Danny couldn't hear me. In the near-death state, I was more acutely aware of all that was going on around me than I'd ever been in my normal physical state. I wasn't using my 5 biological senses, yet I was keenly taking everything in. It was as though another, completely different type of perception kicked in, and I seemed to encompass everything that was happening as though I was slowly merging with it all. I felt no emotional attachment to my seemingly lifeless body as it lay there on the hospital bed. It didn't feel as though it were mine. It looked far too small and insignificant to have housed what I was experiencing. I felt free and magnificent. Every pain, ache, sadness, and sorrow were gone. I felt completely unencumbered. I couldn't recall feeling this way before or ever. The feeling of complete unconditional love was unlike anything I'd known before. It was total, as if I didn't have to do anything to deserve it, nor did I need to prove myself to earn it. To my amazement, I became aware of the presence of my father, who died 10 years earlier. "Dad, you're here. I can't believe it." I wasn't speaking those words, I was merely thinking them. In fact, it was more like feeling the emotions behind the words, as there was no other way of communicating in that realm other than through emotions. My heightened awareness and feelings of unconditional love in that expanded realm were indescribable, despite my best efforts to explain them. Okay. I saw my life intricately woven into everything I'd known so far. My experience was like a single strand threaded through the huge and complexly colored images of an infinite tapestry. All the other threads and colors represented my relationships, including every life I'd touched. There were threads representing my mother, my father, my brother, my husband, and every other person who'd ever come into my life, whether they related to me in a positive or negative way. So I'm going to skip a little bit of this. So what subsequently happened is incredibly hard to describe. It felt as though whatever I directed my awareness toward appeared before me. Second, time was completely irrelevant. It wasn't even a factor to consider. It didn't exist. Prior to this point, doctors had conducted tests on the functionality of my organs, and their report had already been written. But in that realm, it seemed as though the outcome of those tests depended on the decision I had yet to make, whether to live or to continue onward into death. If I chose death, the test results would indicate organ failure. If I chose to come back to physical life, they'd show my organs beginning to function again. At that moment, I decided I didn't want to return to earth life. I then became conscious of my physical body dying, and I saw the doctor speaking with my family, explaining that it was death due to organ failure. Simultaneously, my father communicated with me, "This is as far as you can go, sweetheart. If you go any further, you cannot turn back." I became aware of a boundary before me, although the demarcation wasn't physical. It was more like an invisible threshold marked by a variation of energy levels. I knew that if I crossed it, there was no turning back. All my ties to the physical world would be permanently severed. But before I stepped toward this realm for good, I became aware of a new level of truth. I discovered that since I'd realized who I really was, if I chose to go back to life, my body would heal rapidly. And so I returned. And when I regained consciousness, my cancer began to heal. To the amazement of my doctors, I was free of all of the countless tumors and cancer indications within weeks. Murjani has written a full account of her experience in her best-selling book, Dying to Be Me. There are many more, okay, I'm winding up now. There are many more remarkable accounts such as these on YouTube, other online sites, IONS and NERF, as well as many books. I have one more brief account. Upon telling a friend that I was going to speak about NDEs, they told me of a person whom I know and who recently experienced a cardiac arrest and had an NDE for the few minutes that they were clinically dead. They are an extremely responsible individual in the service industry, and this person is the very opposite of a flake and of rock-solid integrity. They do not want to share the experience, not only because of the potential vulnerability of being suspected of insanity or dishonesty, but also because beauty and personal meaning, the beauty and the personal meaning of the experience are so precious, the person doesn't want to expose any of it to any type of misunderstanding or devaluing. Suffice it to say that the person had the ineffable experience of total, boundless, and unconditional love in a paradisiacal environment, and stated unequivocally that there simply is no language to describe it. The person was told that they needed to return and found themselves immediately back. The cardiac arrest was so completely reversed that they weren't even admitted to the hospital but went home that day. The person experienced depression for about 6 weeks after the incident because they acutely missed the blissful happiness. And though this person is happy and grateful for their earthly life, what they experienced during their sojourn to the other side was so much better. My friend, who is this person's partner, say they still catch a certain look on their face, and they can tell that their partner is full of longing for what they experienced during the NDE. On closing, as Kenneth Ring writes, death is not a dead end. This is a huge topic, and I have attempted to present an overview, the tip of a very large and intriguing iceberg. No matter where you fall on the question of the validity of these experiences, the research shows that the experiences themselves are genuine. They have a notable similarity of characteristics across nations, cultures, religions, faith, or lack thereof, and ages of experiencers. But the most remarkable aspect of the people of the study of the phenomenon is the lasting change that these experiences bring about in the people that have them. It takes, so that being said, experiencers are profoundly changed after an NDE. Many of them say that their experience was intensely real, more so than the reality of earthly existence. The values they learn by being in an all-encompassing love on the other side have a deep effect on them as they return to this life. I'm struck by how many say, even decades later, when I remember, it's as if I'm there all over again. It is so vivid. They become kinder. They change their occupations to some type of service. If they were conventionally religious previously, they become much more open and accepting, which leads often to problems with spouses, other family members, and friends who no longer recognize them. This can lead to family estrangement and even divorce, unless the other family members can grow to accept the new person which has come back to them. So, beyond all the spiritual possibilities that NDEs point to, they affect a profound change in the person toward altruism, kindness, acceptance, compassion, forgiveness, and forbearance, all forms of love. And all the things all religions at their core, and certainly Unitarian Universalism, espouse and urge all of us to live by. Not a bad thing to bring back with you from the land of the dead. Namaste. Thank you.